first thing we have to talk about is Wonder Woman, Earth 1, Volume 2, coming out in just a few days. Why did you think this part of Diana's life needed to be told?
It's a good. Amazingly, this book is amazingly well timed. It's. Have you read it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I loved it. It was amazing.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I need 2 years to draw those things. I mean, it takes forever, and Grant and I are putting a lot of energy, and we don't quite know when we start when it's going to actually hit market, and we certainly didn't know what would happen in the world at the same time. And so this book deals with a lot of the same issue we're dealing in the real world about the power of men on over feminism and trying to control things. We're talking about a lot about control and some abuse also, and the quest of Wonder Woman to try to debate and get this a bit wild idea of feminism that she had, because it's the brand of feminism from the 40s that the Amazon had.
While you were working on this, did Morrison or you try to kind of gear it in a certain way to work with the current political climate? Did you change it as you were working on it to kind of react to that?
Well, not really. When we did the first one, at the end of it, and we were talking about the second volume and the third volume, that was 2016, and the atmosphere back then was that the feminist movement will reach a milestone, and we'll get the first female president, and in a context where she would slay this dragon, the bus at the end of the video game type monster there. So it was this big moment coming up, and we were convinced that was the outcome of it. As it turned out, it wasn't, and this must have steered Grant into a different direction. This and the Me Too movement also, there is some reference to it in the comic. So there is, for sure, there is influence. Grant is very sensible, I feel, to the world, and will it will adapt. And because we work 10 pages, 20 pages at a time, it's always a work in progress.
Right.
So there's always a moment where we might let our sensibility of the moment steer the story into a different direction or emphasis on something else.
Okay. So artistically, what did you think was the biggest challenge of working on this second volume as an artist?
Yeah, well, the problem with the Earth one, it's the same with the first and the second, is the world building aspect of it, because everything needs to be built.
Right.
So, traditionally the Wonder Woman world is a Greek world. I mean, if you look at the Perez or even the Azzarello interpretation of it, it's when they flee to the island. They go with their culture and they stay there for thousands of years, which made not much sense for us in Grant. And so the premise is that, well, they will keep evolving. They will create a culture, a technology, books. There'll be plays. There'll be discovery in clothing, and because they live in peace for 3,000 years and they are superior and everything. So so that forces me to come up with some visual that fit with this crazy reality. So every time I need to draw a doorknob or an helmet or a spoon, I need to figure out, okay, what do they have, because it doesn't exist. At the same time, I need to find a way to make it clear that, it's coming from the Greek, but also influenced by nature, because that's all they got on the island. They look at each other as a woman form, but also birds and seashells and whatever nature they have access to. And so all these graphic elements I try to incorporate into their visual culture. So it's fun, but it takes a lot of time.
It looks like it takes a long time. It's beautiful artwork. Kind of going off of what you said about nature, I know in your Swamp Thing series, you said that you kind of worked off of your knowledge of insects and nature. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, way before doing comics, the kid that I was had a dream, and it was entomology. So the collection, I had a huge collection of insects. I still have, by the way. And I was going into that branch of biology, but I was still drawing on the side, just for fun. Mm-hmm. And eventually, I realized that my childhood romantic vision of entomology was not really realistic. I had this idea that would be some sort of Indiana Jones into the jungles, finding cool insect and giving them my own name, because that's what you do, by the way, in biology. When you describe a new species, you can call it with your last name usually. Some dream like this. This would be my pretension to glory.
The Paquette spider.
Yeah, this beetle, whatever, Paquettensis or something, a funnel, and so that's not at all what entomology. Well, some entomology masters, that's what they do there, but most of it you work with agriculture and try to prevent pests to eat like grains or something.
That's so interesting.
So it's not the same thing, and I went into comic instead, thinking none of my love of insect and nature will actually play at all, unless I'm drawing blue beetle, and even then, it's not a beetle for real. And so when we got to do Swamp Thing, and I was a big fan of Swamp Thing before, because he was, as a character, and Bernie Wrightson was my first introduction to American comic. Being French Canadian, I was mostly exposed to European stuff. And not Swamp Thing per se, but Bernie, and then later on Swamp Thing was my first connection to the American comics. When they did the New 52, they offered me a bunch of titles to choose from, and one of them was Swamp Thing, and I saw in it the opportunity of going back to my childhood almost, so my love of the character and that style of very dramatic, lush visual, but also my notion of knowing what nature looked like and try to, take advantage of it.
Nice. I'm glad you mentioned your early love for European comics. I was wondering if you can still see any of those influences in your current work.
It's harder to tell now because I've been here for a long time doing American comic. But when I first started, and actually that to answer this, we need to understand that when I started in the beginning of 2000, like end of the 90s, comics were still like a monthly thing, and people had to go fast, and that was there were no rotative teams or no special project. It was all monthly booking. When you signed in, you had to survive. And a lot of the guys and girls that were doing it, mostly guys like back then in the 90s, they were not doing that much research for backgrounds and stuff like that because they had to go fast. And especially if you go to Istanbul or Paris, they would draw like a very horrible Paris, but put the Eiffel Tower or some type of Eiffel Tower in the back there. And because of my love of European comics is 44 pages, and you got a year, 2 years to do it. So all the research is awesome. Every single panel is research. These guys, they need to draw Venice. They'll go to Venice for a month and take photos and watercolor, and they will take it just to prepare for the book. And so that was my world in which that was my inspiration, at least. So I was very big into doing my research and trying to make my background as accurate and culturally relevant as possible. And in that period, I think that was a difference, maybe against other artists at the time. Nowadays, people have the time and they have Google Image, and so there is no excuse to do like an awful Paris. You Google, you can street view the place, and most artists take advantage of these technology to get access to these references. I remember I had a vast library of everything. I would go and buy grandfather's clock book just in case I need to draw a grandfather clock. Maybe not. That was before the internet, so you couldn't search grandfather. Now I do that on Google Image, and I got 16,000 hits of cool clocks. But back then I needed like a books on clocks and on every other element, on spoon again.
Right. Okay, just one last fun question.
All right.
If you could redesign one character, who would it be?
Black Manta. I just find it ridiculous. I mean, some people miraculously almost manage to make it look scary and tough. I don't know, but this helmet, just no. It needs something deep.
I agree.
Maybe an actual manta, like the beast. I don't know.